It is told of Mullah Nasruddin long before he'd become a mullah. In fact, from the very earliest age, he was considered to be very contrary. So his family became accustomed to when they wanted him to do anything, they would tell him the opposite. But one day he was traveling with his father when they were taking a load of flour to the market, and they were halfway through a stream when suddenly the load began to tilt to the left. So his father called to him, "Quick, Nasruddin, push the load to the left," expecting that he would push it to the right. But instead he pushed it to the left, and of course it tipped the whole thing over so that the whole load of flour went into the stream, and his father shouted at him, "You fool! Why didn't you do as you usually do? Do the opposite, what I said." And the mullah said, "Well, it's my birthday today, and I'm supposed to have reached the age of adulthood, so from today I've decided to do as I'm told." Then there's a story about a very rich merchant who had come to the time of his demise, but he had an only son who was a ne'er-do-well. His son spent his nights at the tavern entertaining his friends till the wee hours of in the mornings, and he would cavort with ladies of the night and so forth. And his father would very often admonish him and try to guide him to change his ways, but to no avail. But the father, laying on his deathbed, called his son to him, and he said to his son, "Well, you know, after all this time, I'm not going to scold you or try to change you, because I know that this is of no use," he said, "but I would like to give you 3 pieces of advice." Well, the son thought to himself, well, at least I owe this to the old fellow, so he decided to listen. So he sat by his father's deathbed as his father said to him, "Please, son, firstly, before you go to the tavern at night, do not go before 1 o'clock in the morning." The son thought to himself, "Oh, that's the best time, that I could do that easily." And then the father said, "And if you want to visit your female friends, be sure that you go before 10 o'clock in the mornings." "Oh, yes," thought the son, "this is when my manhood is at its most active. That's a good time for me to go." And then his father said, and the 3rd piece of advice is, if you get angry in the evening, wait until the morning before you take action. Now the son assured his father that he would obey and follow what had been told to him. So the old merchant was able to die peacefully. But then, just shortly after the required days of mourning were complete, the son had the urge, of course, to go down to meet his friends at the tavern. And just as he was about to leave the door, he suddenly remembered his father's piece of advice, and so he waited patiently until 1 o'clock in the morning, and then he made his way to the tavern. And of course, when he got there, he saw all his friends in this disgusting state of inebriation, all lolling around on the floor, lying in their own vomit and so forth. And he was so disgusted that from that moment on, he decided that he was not going to go to the tavern again. Well, of course, there was early morning when he woke up and his juices were flowing, so he decided that he would go to visit one of his lady friends, and instead of waiting to what was the usual time of such meetings, he followed his father's advice to go. And since it was just before 10 o'clock, he went off and knocked on her door, and she opened the door and led him into her bedchamber. But he suddenly looked, and seeing this woman in the light of day with mascara running down her cheeks and the smell of stale body odor, and one can imagine, so forth, and he thought about himself, and he was in a similar state, and he was equally disgusted with this. So he decided from that moment on he was not going to follow this pattern anymore. And after some time he became absorbed in his father's business and really became a successful merchant in his own right, his energies now being channeled into those kinds of endeavors. And even after some while he found a rather nice young girl and got married. But it wasn't too long after the wedding that he had to go on a long journey, a business voyage, trading and so forth. And it so happened that he was away for about 2 years. But he came back longing to have reunion with his lovely bride. And so instead of waiting until a reasonable time to come and have that reunion, he went home at night. But just as he was coming in the door, he could hear sounds from their bedroom coming forth of conversation and giggling and laughter. And he immediately thought that his wife was being unfaithful to him, so he took out his sword and he was about to go and do them both in, when he suddenly remembered his father's final piece of advice. If you're angry at night, wait until the morning to take action. So he went to an inn for the night, and very early in the morning he came to his house, ready to take on his wife's lover and dispose of both of them. But when he walked into the house, he saw his wife dandling a small child on her lap, and he demanded, "Who is this child?" And she said, "Why, it is your son. He was born just months after you departed." "And where does he sleep?" demanded the... "Oh," she said, "he sleeps with me." And suddenly he realized that the conversation, the laughter that he had heard, it was between the mother and the son. So he remembered his father's pieces of advice, and they became a part of his nature from there on. Exploration into divine psychology raises questions for us. One of them that's arisen is, where is the seat of the psyche? Recognizing that psychology, of course, is to do with the psyche. Where is this seat of the psyche? Is it the mind? Is it the subconscious? Is it the gut? Is it the heart? And what could the difference be between psychology as it's known and divine psychology. These are questions that are raised and seem to require further exploration. But can we do so until we find the seat from where our understandings, our realizations, our awarenesses arise? Is it our mind? Is it our subconscious? Our gut intuitions? Our heart? And the difference between psychology and divine psychology? What shift do we have to make to begin to know the difference? Psychology, the human psyche, and divine psychology. Are we then looking at a universal psyche, a cosmic psyche? These questions remain for us as we continue our exploration. But what arises for you out of these simple stories? Mula and the merchant. If we allow them to arise, perhaps we have a possibility of finding out from whence they come.